Look around a typical high school classroom of, say, 30 kids.
Right.
Statistically, 5 or 6 of them have engaged in intentional self-injury.
It's a heavy thought.
It really is. Today, we are dismantling the profound misunderstanding around why up to 18% of U.S. adolescents are doing this, and why the underlying reasons are, well, they're rarely what adults think they are.
Exactly. The landscape of adolescent mental health is just crowded with noise and, frankly, a lot of adult anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. So, welcome to today's deep dive, where we're looking at a topic that fundamentally shifts how we understand adolescent pain. We're pulling from this really eye-opening clinical briefing titled The Clinical Landscape of Adolescent Non-Suicidal Self-Injury.
And our mission for you today is to cut through that panic, right? To give you a clear, grounded perspective on an issue that parents, teachers, and, the community in general frequently misinterpret.
Yeah, but we aren't just stopping at the medical realities here. We're also exploring the concrete ways out of this crisis, using some incredible data from a Georgia-based program called MentalSpace School.
Which is so crucial because that 18% prevalence statistic you just mentioned,
Yeah.
I mean, that demands that we understand the exact mechanics of what we are dealing with.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the fundamental definition of the behavior completely changes how adults need to react to it, right?
It dictates the entire intervention strategy. We have to start with the clinical definition. So we are talking about non-suicidal self-injury, or NSSI.
Right.
The briefing defines this as intentional self-inflicted injury, but, and this is key, completely without suicidal intent.
Okay, the intentional part makes sense, but that second half, the without suicidal intent part, that is the crux of this entire conversation.
It really is.
The source labels this a critical clarification, and I want to make sure you, the listener, really absorb this because it changes everything. NSSI is not a failed suicide attempt.
No, not at all. The medical community is very, very deliberate in separating those two concepts.
How so?
Well, the DSM-5, which is, the standard diagnostic manual used by mental health professionals, it actually lists NSSI as a condition for further study.
Okay.
And it defines it specifically as self-injury occurring on 5 or more days in the past year.
Wait, 5 or more days? So this isn't just like a one-off accident.
Exactly. It's not a momentary lapse in judgment. It's a pattern. And the methods most commonly seen in the clinical data, they include cutting, burning, scratching, and severe hitting of oneself.
Man, and the DSM-5 also outlines the specific goals behind this behavior, which I found fascinating.
Right, the driving factors.
Yeah, the text lists 3 main ones: relief from negative feelings, resolving an interpersonal difficulty, or inducing a positive emotional state.
Which completely shifts the narrative.
It paints a totally different picture of the adolescent. I mean, it sounds like NSSI is functioning as a dangerous physical pressure release valve for overwhelming emotions rather than like an exit door.
Yes. And what's fascinating here is that your pressure release valve concept perfectly aligns with the biology of what is happening.
Oh, really?
Yeah, these adolescents are experiencing profound emotional dysregulation. Their nervous systems are just effectively overloaded.
Okay.
So when the psychological pain becomes completely intolerable, they use physical sensation to literally force their brain to change channels.
Wow. To just shock the system.
Precisely. The physical pain acts as a grounding mechanism. It demands the brain's immediate attention, which temporarily distracts them from the emotional agony.
Or forcefully releases that internal pressure.
Right. They're actively trying to manage their distress. I mean, they're trying to find a way to cope with living when their emotional reality feels entirely unbearable.
It is a massive paradigm shift. You transition from viewing a teenager as someone actively trying to end their life to seeing them as someone desperately trying to regulate a nervous system that is just trapped in a state of alarm.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting. I'm struggling to reconcile this part.
Okay, what's that?
We just established that the entire point of this behavior is to cope with living, right? It's not an exit strategy.
Right.
So why does the clinical briefing simultaneously flag this as one of the absolute strongest predictors for a future suicide attempt? The text explicitly states that even without suicidal intent, NSSI is a serious risk marker.
It's the ultimate paradox.
Yeah. If the goal isn't death, how do those two clinical realities coexist?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the mechanics of habituation.
Habituation.
Yeah. Even though the immediate intent of the self-injury is not suicidal, the presence of the behavior reveals 2 things. First, this adolescent is experiencing severe emotional pain.
Right.
And second, more importantly, their current toolbox for coping with that pain is deeply compromised.
Mm.
They have crossed a very significant psychological barrier where physical self-harm has become an acceptable method of relief.
Ah, I see. So it's not just a warning light on the dashboard.
No.
It's more like a driver who figures out that, I don't know, cutting the brakes is a highly effective way to slow down the car.
That's a terrifyingly accurate way to put it.
Like, it works temporarily to relieve the immediate pressure of driving too fast, but by doing it repeatedly, they are completely losing their fear of a catastrophic crash.
That habituation to danger is the core issue. When an adolescent gets used to physical pain as a daily coping strategy, their acquired capability for severe, lethal self-injury drastically increases.
Because the natural human aversion to pain it erodes.
Exactly. The aversion to bodily harm fades away. So while a specific instance of NSSI isn't a suicide attempt, the intense emotional despair driving it, combined with this newly lowered inhibition towards self-inflicted harm, places that teenager in a remarkably high-risk category.
Wow.
The overlap with suicidality over time is just immense. That is why the clinical community treats NSSI as a massive crisis, demanding comprehensive evaluation. It's not a phase they will just grow out of.
Because they have lost the biological safety net that keeps most of us from hurting ourselves? That makes total sense. And it underscores why adults need to know what to look for before the situation escalates.
It's critical to catch it early.
The briefing outlines some subtle warning signs that require, honestly, hypervigilance. Unexplained injuries are the obvious one, but the behavioral shifts are where it gets insidious.
Very insidious.
Like wearing long sleeves in the dead of summer, for instance.
Yeah, you see a teenager in July wearing a heavy sweatshirt, and the common adult reaction is to just brush it off as a fashion choice or a teen quirk.
Oh, totally. Kids these days.
Exactly. But the source urges adults to look closer.
Along with social withdrawal and sudden mood changes, there is a really specific behavioral marker mentioned. A reluctance to undress for swimming, for physical education class, or for medical visits.
Yes.
When you think about the daily life of a high schooler, the anxiety of that must be suffocating. The terror of knowing the evidence of your internal emotional pain is physically etched onto your body, and the desperate, exhausting attempts to hide it from your peers and teachers in a locker room.
It's heartbreaking. The psychological weight of hiding the injuries often exacerbates the very isolation and negative feelings that trigger the NSSI in the first place.
It's a brutal feedback loop.
Exactly. It creates a brutal feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
So identifying those subtle signs, the sudden refusal to go to the community pool, the oversized hoodie in a heat wave, that is step one.
Right.
But the clinical briefing is incredibly firm on what happens next. Identifying the crisis is useless if the intervention is flawed.
And this is where the source material pivots from outlining the crisis to outlining concrete hope.
Yes, thankfully.
There are scientifically backed, evidence-based treatments that actually work.
Absolutely.
The briefing specifically names dialectical behavior therapy adapted for adolescents, or DBTA. It calls DBTA the absolute gold standard, backed by strong RCT evidence.
Right, and for anyone outside the medical research community, RCT stands for Randomized Controlled Trial.
Which is a big deal, right?
It's huge. This isn't a trendy wellness concept. It is the highest level of scientific proof available. It means DBTA has been tested with the same rigorous empirical scrutiny that we use to evaluate cancer drugs or heart medications. We know mathematically that it rewires how these kids process distress.
The source notes that DBTA focuses heavily on teaching tangible skills for emotion regulation and distress tolerance.
Yeah.
But how does that actually work in practice? I mean, how do you teach a teenager whose nervous system is on fire to just tolerate distress without using their established physical pressure release valve?
By giving them a different, safer biological reset.
Okay.
In DBTA, therapists don't just talk about feelings. They teach actionable physiological mechanisms.
Like what?
Well, for example, DBTA teaches a distress tolerance skill called TIPP. Part of that involves temperature manipulation.
Temperature.
Yeah. An adolescent in a state of extreme emotional crisis might be taught to literally plunge their face into a bowl of ice water.
Wait, really? Ice water?
Yes. The shock of the cold water on the face triggers what is called the mammalian dive reflex.
The mammalian dive reflex.
Exactly. It is a hardwired biological response that instantly forces the heart rate to slow down. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the body responsible for resting and digesting.
Oh, wow. So it forces the body to calm down.
It forcefully interrupts the panic or the urge to self-harm by changing the body's chemistry in seconds.
That's incredible.
It replaces the dangerous physical shock of self-injury with a completely safe physiological reset. They're literally handed a new, healthy toolbox.
That makes so much sense.
The briefing also notes another evidence-based option called mentalization-based therapy for adolescents, or MBTA. This one helps teens understand their own and others' mental states, addressing that interpersonal difficulty goal we discussed earlier.
Now, there is a very strict rule attached to these treatments in the text, and it feels non-negotiable.
Yes, it is.
Family involvement is essential. You cannot just drop your kid off at a therapist's office for an hour on a Tuesday and expect them to heal in a vacuum.
No, it doesn't work that way.
You can't send a student back into the exact same family dynamic without equipping the parents with the same distress tolerance vocabulary.
The family unit has to fundamentally shift how it communicates and manages conflict.
Right.
But, implementing these specialized intensive therapies raises a massive logistical issue, especially in a school environment.
Which brings us to the most pointed directive in the entire briefing.
Let's hear it.
The source explicitly mandates that the discovery of NSSI in a school setting must trigger an immediate clinical referral and family involvement.
Immediate.
It states unequivocally that it should never be handled with isolated school counseling sessions.
Never. Because we have to look at the reality of the education system.
Right.
School counselors are indispensable, but they are managing staggering caseloads. Sometimes 400 to 500 students to one counselor.
That's just unsustainable.
It is. They are navigating college applications, scheduling conflicts, minor behavioral disputes, and an SSI, as we established, is a severe risk marker predicting future suicide attempts.
It's life or death.
It requires clinical therapies like DBTA, which demand specialized training and intensive ongoing sessions. A well-meaning school counselor having a supportive chat with a student once a week is simply not a medically sufficient response to a lowered barrier to self-harm.
So if a school counselor isn't medically equipped to handle that clinical risk, where does a teacher turn when they notice those long sleeves in July?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, if we are saying schools absolutely cannot rely on their standard infrastructure for a crisis affecting 18% of their students, how do they bridge the gap?
They often can't.
You can't just hand a student a clinical referral slip and blindly assume their family has transportation or the resources or the insurance to secure a specialized DBTA therapist by next week.
And that is the exact systemic void leaving millions of adolescents vulnerable.
Right.
The referral gets made, the family hits an insurance or transportation wall, and the student falls right back into the dangerous feedback loop.
It's tragic.
This is why the second half of our source material is so vital. It offers a structural functioning blueprint to actually fill that void.
And this is where MentalSpace School enters the picture.
Yes.
It is a K-12 mental health support model specifically engineered for Georgia schools, and it is built to tackle this exact logistical nightmare.
It's a game changer.
They provide the massive infrastructure required to meet those strict clinical guidelines we just discussed.
Let's walk through what this actually looks like for a student, just practically speaking.
Okay.
Imagine a teacher spots the warning signs and notifies the school counselor. Instead of the counselor trying to manage the NSSI alone or handing the family a static list of community therapists with 6-month waiting lists, the school utilizes the MentalSpace system.
So they tap into an external network.
Yes. The program provides same-day teletherapy and dedicated therapist teams assigned directly to that specific school.
Wow. So the student isn't being thrown into the void. They're being connected to a dedicated clinical team immediately.
Immediately. Furthermore, they offer crisis intervention, suicide and violence prevention, staff wellness, and family counseling.
Ah, family counseling.
Yes. That family counseling piece directly solves the strict clinical rule from the briefing that family involvement in NSSI treatment is mandatory. MentalSpace incorporates it right into their systemic umbrella.
But the true genius of the MentalSpace model, and this blew me away, is how it dismantles the socioeconomic walls.
The insurance part.
Yes, the source highlights their insurance structure, and it is incredible. They accept almost every major insurance in the state. Blue Cross, Cigna, Aetna, United Healthcare, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, Amerigroup.
That's comprehensive.
But the vital piece of data here is that for students on Medicaid, the cost is $0.
The $0 Medicaid structure cannot be overstated. I mean, by completely removing out-of-pocket costs for low-income families, they are tearing down the single largest barrier blocking vulnerable populations from evidence-based clinical care.
Yeah, the family doesn't have to choose between groceries and DBTA therapy.
Exactly. And because it utilizes teletherapy, the barrier of a parent having to leave work to drive across town to a clinic is also eliminated.
It's meeting the families exactly where they are.
It really is.
The program is also built around incredibly strict compliance frameworks. The text notes they are fully HIPAA and FERPA compliant.
Which is crucial in a school setting.
Right, and for anyone unfamiliar, HIPAA protects your medical privacy and FERPA protects your educational records. It means a student's highly sensitive clinical therapy notes aren't just floating around the principal's office or, accessible to their math teacher.
It creates a secure medical firewall within the educational setting.
Exactly.
They also provide vital support for HB 268 compliance.
Oh, right, the Georgia law.
Yeah, for listeners outside of Georgia, HB 268 is a state law requiring schools to have specific, mandated suicide prevention and mental health policies firmly in place.
And the briefing notes that HB 268 compliance has a strict deadline of July 2026.
The clock is ticking.
Schools are under a very real ticking clock to get these comprehensive, compliant support systems operational. But we aren't just looking at a theoretical idea that sounds good on paper here.
No, there's proof.
The MentalSpace model provides hard empirical data proving that this systemic approach actually works.
Those here are the numbers.
The numbers they report are stunning. 89% improved attendance, 92% reduced anxiety, and an 85% family satisfaction rate.
That 89% improved attendance statistic is, I think, the most revealing metric.
Really? Why attendance?
Well, when an adolescent is trapped in the cycle of severe emotional dysregulation and physical self-harm, their ability to function in a normal academic environment just collapses.
Yeah, getting to class is the last thing on their mind.
Right. So improved attendance means the therapy is working. It means the student has acquired the distress tolerance skills to actually get out of bed, face their peers, and participate in their own lives again.
Wow. The data completely backs up the shift from isolated, well-meaning talks to a cohesive clinical response.
It proves it's possible.
When a school has an immediate, compliant, and accessible pipeline to the exact care the medical community demands, the students actually recover. The source provides their contact points for anyone who wants to examine the infrastructure: mentalspaceschool.com and mentalspaceschool@tidishtherapy.com.
It is a functioning blueprint of the education and mental health systems finally communicating.
Absolutely. So pulling all of this together, the clinical definitions, the biological habituation to risk, the ice water mechanics of DBTA, and these systemic teletherapy solutions, what does this all mean for the listener?
The core takeaway is a complete fundamental reframing of how you view non-suicidal self-injury.
Right.
It is a highly complex biological and psychological mechanism for managing unbearable emotional pain. It is a desperate attempt to cope with living, not an attempt to die.
A pressure valve.
Yes.
Yeah.
But because that habituation to pain drastically lowers the barrier to a future suicide attempt, it is a glaring red flag of high risk. We have to stop minimizing it, and we have to stop relying on inadequate, isolated counseling.
The stakes are too high.
They are. We have the data, we have the evidence-based therapies like DBTA, and we have the systemic blueprints to deliver that care without socioeconomic barriers. The mission now is implementation.
It is about using the tools we empirically know can rewire the nervous system and save lives.
Exactly. And, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought that steps outside the clinical data and looks at the broader sociology of what we've explored today.
Okay.
I want you to mull over a specific line from the DSM-5 criteria we discussed at the very beginning.
Lay it on us.
The diagnostic manual states that one of the primary goals driving a teenager to intentionally injure themselves is resolving an interpersonal difficulty.
Resolving an interpersonal difficulty.
Right. I want you to think about the weight of that. What does it say about the modern adolescent experience and the severe limitations of our current communication tools that up to 18% of teenagers feel that physical self-injury is the most effective, or perhaps the only, way they have left to communicate their deepest interpersonal distress to the outside world?